experience.
So if you're thinking of learning a foreign language and you're really motivated, you should go ahead and check out the link below in the description to this YouTube video, or if you're listening on the podcast, in the show notes, because there you're going to find my link to italki, which is a website with which I've found so many language tutors over the years. They have over 110 different languages there, and you can take the classes via Skype. That's what I did, one-on-one, to learn languages like Russian. I've also learned Ukrainian using teachers that I found on italki. And there they also have a function called an italki Classroom, where you can actually take them outside of Skype. There's actually a classroom feature that they've added to the service. That's a great platform. You also get $10 credit if you go through my special link below. There in the description, gets you started on taking your first class. Is going to be one-to-one tuition. That's what I use, and that's what I found to be really effective over the year in all the languages I've been learning, like French, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, Russian, Ukrainian, Romanian, and lots more. So best of luck. Go check it out. Welcome back to part 2 of this episode, the travel journey episode on the Czar Experience podcast with me, Connor Klein. If you haven't listened or watched part 1, go back and do that now before you start this part 2, so you don't miss out and you actually follow what I'm talking about, how my journey has led me to here, this city, which is Odessa, Ukraine, on the shores of the Black Sea. Go back, as I said, to the previous video on YouTube or the previous episode, or the previous upload on SoundCloud or iTunes, wherever you happen to be listening to this, if you're listening to it as opposed to watching it on YouTube, and you'll get part 1. This is part 2. Let's get into it. Let's get into part 2 of my travel story. For example, I got accused of being on a fake passport when I actually crossed into Ukraine, and I was taken to and interrogated, accused of being Russian, even though I hardly spoke a word of the language. But anyways, in the end, that was all fine. I was allowed into the country at least. Then throughout that trip, a girl here in Odessa tried to steal my new cell phone, my new smartphone. It was like a rival to the iPhone at the time. It was actually a Nokia. I know they don't exist anymore. And I managed to miraculously get it back. She actually left the club, Ibiza Club, which is a famous nightclub here, with my phone, but I did get it back by a complete miracle. I managed to find her and retrieve it before she had a chance to disappear. I got drugged. Yeah, that actually happened to me. I was unconscious for 36 hours in Crimea, in Sevastopol. And fortunately, nothing bad happened to me. I wasn't robbed or anything. I just woke up a day and a half later in my apartment. My wallet was there, my passport there, my phone was there. Again, I was extremely lucky. So why was all this happening to me? Well, it was in part because I was actually very naive. And I was really suffering, as I said, from this culture shock, because I didn't really know much about how the country operated, the people, how they interact with each other. And my Russian was so poor that, the people who want to take advantage of a visitor, they were all seeing me and targeting moi here, yours truly. And that was something that became more and more important. I had another problem with a taxi driver. Like, he basically ripped me off. I mean, it wasn't a huge amount of money. It was like 50 euros for a trip between 2 cities. But again, because I didn't really understand, and I felt very vulnerable. I actually felt intimidated a lot because I couldn't understand things. I was disorientated. I couldn't read things that were written everywhere very easily. Had all these unfortunate experiences with girls trying to rob me, as you can tell. So it was really like, I left the trip extremely philosophical, and I headed back to Brussels, and I was determined to come back and conquer this region, metaphorically speaking, of course, not violently. And you're probably asking yourself, Connor, if you had this kind of like awful experience and traumatic experience coming here, why would you ever want to do that again to yourself? Are you like a sucker for punishment? Why bother? Just stick to Western Europe. Everything is great there. Everything is set up, as you said, for tourists. Why bother coming back here? Now, I've described some of the things that went wrong because I wasn't prepared for the trip correctly, but I also had a lot of really cool shit happen to me as well. Like, I'm still friends with, I talk with occasionally, Ruud. Met him at an airport in Simferopol, which is the capital of Crimea. And he actually took me to
music festival, and he was managing Arne van Buuren, the famous Dutch DJ there at the time. So I got to hang out with him. He introduced me to lots of people. We had a crazy time at this amazing music festival, Kazantip, which unfortunately no longer exists since Russia's annexation of the Crimean Peninsula a few years ago. But that was really something amazing, and it really got me hooked because it was really like I loved and enjoyed the interaction with the people who are not doing the nefarious things to me, the bad things to me. And I really felt it was an adventure because Central Europe, yeah, a lot of people refer to Central Europe as Eastern Europe. Listen, Prague is further west than Vienna. That's not Eastern Europe. It's probably Western Europe, let's be honest about it. You can call it Central Europe, Mitteleuropa in German. Places like Budapest are not Eastern Europe, culturally not at all. So, you know, obviously I understand the history. They were under communist regimes, pro-Soviet regimes for a certain amount of time in the Second World War, post-Second World War period, but those countries are like so anchored in Western Europe today through the European Union and obviously NATO, and culturally they look westwards, and it's very different here when you come to Ukraine. I know things have changed in the last 5 years. This country does look more westward than it did before, and it's in a process of transition, but definitely there's a big cultural difference between coming to Ukraine and going, say, to Prague or to Budapest. They're fantastic cities, don't get me wrong, you should definitely visit them, but it's not the same experience. So when I got back to Brussels, and I think this is really the key for you guys, like I'd had this experience, I was kind of in one way exhilarated by the whole thing, and in another way it's kind of like terrifying, to be honest, because all these like pretty bad things were happening to me, but I got away with it, right? I had nothing really that awful came as a consequence. But when I went back to Brussels, I had a plan and a mission, and I was, first of all, I made big changes in preparation for the second solo trip to Ukraine the following year, and that was primarily to focus on learning Russian. Now, that does three things for you. Of course, it makes it easier on a functional basis if you can talk to people and order stuff, read the menu, for example. Definitely you need to invest some time in learning the alphabet. It's not that difficult. A lot of people think learning the alphabet is really hard, but honestly, a week of focusing on it, you'll be able to read Cyrillic if you're not used to it. So that's for Russian or for Ukrainian or Belarusian if you have to read stuff when you're traveling in this region. And the second thing it does is, in order to learn the language, you have to kind of go back to being a 5-year-old, make lots of mistakes, it's very humbling, and you also have to put yourself in the position of a local person and their culture, because a lot of language, first of all, not everything is verbal. There are a lot of mannerisms, Italians use their hands, for example, and French kind of, I guess, this very strong nasal sounds, this kind of aloof attitude, and they communicate through that. And also there's so much culture just caught up in the expressions of the language, how people formulate stuff, that really helps you understand the people a lot more. And then thirdly, and I think almost most importantly for the traveler like you who comes here, is when you can get the grasp on the language, at least up until like a high beginner or low intermediate level, it allows you to distinguish yourself from maybe other tourists who come here and rely on English, which is very difficult to do anyways, but you can survive, of course, in the touristic areas of a big city like Odessa here. You can do that, but local people are actually completely different if you can kind of make that initial conversation started in Russian pretty convincing, or if it's Ukrainian or Belarusian or Polish or whatever you happen to be trying to speak in. Now, I know Poland is also in Central Europe. It's in eastern part of Central Europe. Before I get trolled again, I do know where it is. Like we'll take Moldova, so speaking Romanian. So speaking in those languages definitely distinguishes you from the average traveler or tourist here in particular, because that's what we're looking for. At least I'm looking for when I travel here, and I trust a lot of you are also looking for that kind of more traveler adventure than just a touristic experience. And so that's really key to it. So I focus on that, and I appreciate a lot of you have very busy lives. Not everybody can come here for 1 or 2 months a year and hang out and really get to know the city. I encourage you to take advantage of it, if you have that possibility. But I was actually working as a lawyer, and a lot of pressure. I worked a lot of hours per week, like 80 to 100. They're massive stress. But I decided that for 2 hours a week, I was going to take Skype classes one-on-one with a native Russian speaker and really start to learn the language. And I recommend you go look for your teachers on italki or italki, and there's some starter credit. I'll link them below in the show notes and in the YouTube video description. And there you get $10 starter credit if you sign up through my link. So it's a little gift for you guys if you decide to go there and look for a tutor. And I really encourage that because it's pretty cost effective online to do it on Skype. And if you're like living in your home country, wherever it is, before you travel, you'll have lots of opportunity to build up that routine and really get to learn the language and get the basics down before you arrive here. Because arriving in a country not just involves having to deal with the language, also, it's like me with a culture shock. It's a lot to do if you're struggling with the language as well. So you want to kind of front load that as much as possible before you come. So I had learned the language. I also started another thing that you can implement depending where you live, of course, but I started to go to a lot of Russian-speaking events, now cultural events, to do with the various countries of the former Soviet Union, like say Ukrainian events, Russian events, Moldovan events, whatever happened to be, Kazakh events. And that allowed me to meet local people at the time I was living in Brussels from those countries. And that was great because then I really got to know their culture even better because I met more people from those countries, and I had the experience of traveling to the region at least, so I could discuss a few things. It was more in-depth, our conversations, and deeper, and I got to know a lot more people from this broader region and their shared history and the differences in their history and perspective. So that was really great, and that's something you can do as well where you're living. I appreciate if you don't live in a big city, that might be harder, but you can do it online as well. You can go into Facebook groups or forums and start to really learn more and meet people from the region while you have the time before. So the second time I came here, it was completely different. I did not experience the culture shock. This preparation period had really helped me, and of course the experience from the first trip. I've never been drugged again in Ukraine. I've never been robbed. I've never really been ripped off. I think once maybe someone tried to shortchange me in Kiev. I've referred to that in another video, I think, after the European Football Championships. And I recognized I just got my change back. I don't have any problems. Now with taxi apps, for example, it makes it a lot easier, to order your taxi. But at the time I had to call taxis. And if you don't speak Russian, you couldn't do that, and you basically get ripped off by the taxi drivers in any of the touristic cities. So it was also a really big help and a big bonus. And my interactions with local people were a lot more deep, made it a lot easier to meet friends here, to meet girls here, of course. Also part of the motivation for me to come back was the renowned beauty of the women here, and it's definitely true in this broader region, Ukraine, Russia, Belarus, for example, Moldova, these countries, lots of beautiful women here, and I was really, of course, motivated to meet and to get to know them better, and that's harder if you're just relying on English, for sure. Definitely the investment in learning Russian has paid huge dividends in that, and I will go into more detail in my dating story in the next episode. So that's basically what transformed it. I have this first experience that led to this kind of epiphany about what I had to do. I was lucky on that first trip, and I want to make sure that you guys come here prepared so that you don't have those kind of experiences that sometimes I read about, like people getting mugged here or just ripped off, or they get in some unsavory situation, especially with dating apps. I have other videos on the YouTube channel about scammers and scams in Eastern Europe, and actually I'm going to make a new video about them just specifically here in Odessa, so I can help you guys out when you come here and you can avoid all those problems. So that's what I did, and that's what I recommend. Now, if you want to go deeper into traveling in this region, I have a free training course that you just have to sign up by email. I'm going to link that below in the show notes and in the YouTube video description, so you can go there and check that out. It's completely free. You just have to type in your email address. I do have a premium course afterwards, and I do provide consulting services if you want to advice and personal coaching about how to travel here, and that also includes, of course, meeting women, how to interact with locals in general, and that kind of intercultural differences that you're going to need to be prepared for. But I know a lot of you write to me about meeting women who subscribe to the channel and are on my mailing list, and you write lots of questions like that. So definitely that's something you might be interested in. But for sure, you should go down and sign up for the free stuff. If you never pay for anything, you still have the value of that, and that's part of the reason that I make these videos, especially for YouTube and now the podcast. I think it's been happening on average once a day that one of you viewers comes up to me here on the street in Odessa in Ukraine, and actually you tell me how much you enjoy my videos and how they've helped you, and actually I'm part of the reason you came here to Odessa. in Ukraine. So that's really, really great for me to hear. So you've been coming up to me, and that's really, it keeps me so motivated that I see the impact I'm having, that I've been able to help you and motivate you and encourage you to come here to Odessa in Ukraine. So definitely I appreciate that, and keep coming up to me if you see me, and drop me a message and let me know how much it meant to you. And don't be shy about writing me on social media or an email. My email is connorklein@czarexperience.com. I'm going to have all that below in the description, so you can go and copy and paste it. You don't have to figure out how to spell my name like a lot of people get it wrong. And you can follow me, of course, on Instagram, on the Instagram stories. My handle is czarexperience. Czar is spelled T-S-A-R, and you can find it there, and then you'll be able to see what I'm up to in the Instagram stories every day here in Odessa in Ukraine. So that's what I hope you got from watching this video podcast, or if you're listening to it on iTunes or on SoundCloud, that you get an overview of what my experience was like. You're probably going to be able to relate to that to a certain extent if you're traveling from abroad here to Eastern Europe, and these are the problems that I faced, and this is how I overcame them ultimately. It's actually a little bit thunder. I wonder if we're going to get a downpour here in Odessa. Oh yeah, I might have to end this one in a few minutes. Yeah, it's very, very humid. You probably can see I'm perspiring a little bit as I speak here. It's like late July, it's very warm, it's probably about 30 degrees. And we're on the shores of the Black Sea, so there is a little bit of breeze, thankfully. So yeah, you want to learn from my mistakes, basically, and come here prepared, and I can help you that with, of course, the content I have on my YouTube channel. And if you want more, as I said, then just contact me and watch the free course and all that kind of stuff, and then you'll be definitely better prepared. And that's what I see from people who I meet here in Odessa who come up to me, you guys who've come up to me over the last week or so. So in the next episode of this video podcast, I'm going to be going into my dating story in particular. I've kind of alluded to it a lot, obviously, in this video and previous episodes of the podcast and in my YouTube videos. So that's going to be coming up here. I'm probably going to shoot it here in Odessa or in Kiev. We'll see. I'm supposed to travel to Kiev tomorrow. I'm going to meet up with a huge YouTuber who's in the travel niche, and he's a really cool guy. But more about that coming in probably a YouTube video in a few weeks. I'm really excited about it. So in the meantime, I wish all of you a splendid day, evening, morning, wherever you are watching this or listening to it from. I see I have a new friend behind me there who just waved. That's always cute. And we will see each other in the next episode of the podcast. As I said, it's going to be about my dating stories. You really want to probably listen to that one if you're interested in coming here for the more to meet women in particular. That's going to be of great interest to you, so you can learn from my experience and my advice about how you should go about things here. So that's it from this episode of the podcast. Do svidania, do pobacenia, and I will see you and all your enthusiastic, smiling faces, pumped to come here to Eastern Europe, to the real, raw east of Europe, in the next episode. So, peace out.
Czar Experience.